From October to December 2023, Gaza was embroiled in a brutal conflict. Bombs fell from the sky, the ground shook with artillery fire. Amidst the chaos, hospitals, meant to be sanctuaries of healing, became tragic casualties of war. The fighting left a trail of destruction, turning these vital institutions into grim reminders of the human cost of conflict. The world watched in horror as reports emerged of hospitals reduced to rubble. Satellite images, stark and undeniable, showed the extent of the damage. Interviews with medical staff, their voices heavy with despair, painted a picture of unimaginable suffering. The heart of Gaza's healthcare system had been ripped apart. The conflict had a devastating impact on the people of Gaza. The most vulnerable, the sick and injured, bore the brunt of the violence. Hospitals, already struggling to cope with limited resources, were overwhelmed by the influx of casualties. The international community condemned the attacks on hospitals, calling for an immediate ceasefire and respect for international humanitarian law. The echoes of bombs and the cries of the wounded served as a stark reminder of the true cost of war. The destruction of hospitals in Gaza was not just a tragedy for the Palestinian people, but a stain on the conscience of humanity. The physical damage inflicted on Gaza's hospitals was extensive. Al-Shifa, the largest hospital in Gaza, suffered significant damage. Its once bustling corridors fell silent, its wards left in ruins. Al-Quds Hospital, run by the Palestine Red Crescent Society, was also hit. The intensive care unit, a lifeline for the critically ill, lay in ruins. These attacks had a crippling effect on Gaza's healthcare system. Hospitals were forced to close their doors, leaving the sick and injured with nowhere to turn. The types of damage varied, but the intent was clear. Craters from high-grade military weaponry scarred the landscape. Munitions fragments, deadly remnants of the conflict, littered the hospital grounds. The use of such powerful weapons in densely populated areas raised serious concerns about the proportionality and indiscriminate nature of the attacks. The destruction of medical facilities and ambulances hampered the ability of medical personnel to provide timely and effective care. The lack of essential medical supplies and equipment further exacerbated the crisis. The international community responded with pledges of aid and medical assistance, but the scale of the devastation was overwhelming. Medical staff in Gaza faced unimaginable challenges. They worked tirelessly, often under heavy fire, to treat the wounded and save lives. Operating rooms became makeshift bomb shelters, the air thick with fear and the smell of antiseptic. Doctors and nurses, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief, struggled to cope with the relentless influx of patients. The lack of essential medical supplies, a direct result of the ongoing blockade, turned routine procedures into life-or-death situations. Basic necessities like bandages, antibiotics, and anesthesia were in critically short supply. The psychological toll on both medical staff and patients was immeasurable. The constant fear of attack, the loss of colleagues and loved ones, and the sheer scale of the suffering left deep emotional scars. Despite the challenges, acts of courage and resilience shone through. Stories emerged of medical professionals risking their lives to reach the wounded, of patients sharing limited resources, and of communities coming together to support those in need. The spirit of the human will to survive, even in the darkest of times, could not be extinguished. International humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders worked tirelessly to provide aid and support, but their efforts were often hampered by the ongoing violence and the difficulties in accessing the besieged territory. The world watched as a humanitarian crisis unfolded, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict on innocent lives. The targeting of hospitals and medical personnel constitutes a grave violation of international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions, ratified by both Israel and Palestine, clearly state that hospitals and medical units must be respected and protected at all times. The deliberate targeting of such facilities is considered a war crime. The international community condemned the attacks on hospitals in Gaza, calling for an independent investigation and accountability for those responsible. Human rights organizations documented the destruction, gathering evidence to support potential legal action. The attacks raised complex legal questions about the principle of distinction, the proportionality of force, and the protection of civilians during armed conflict. The debate over the legality of the attacks often centered around the issue of Hamas's alleged use of hospitals for military purposes. Israel claimed that Hamas used hospitals as command centers and weapons storage facilities, thus losing their protected status under international law. Hamas denied these claims, insisting that hospitals were used solely for their intended purpose, to treat the sick and wounded. The destruction of hospitals in Gaza served as a stark reminder of the urgent need to uphold international humanitarian law and to ensure accountability for violations. It also highlighted the importance of protecting civilians, particularly the most vulnerable, during times of conflict. The international community faced a moral imperative to act decisively to prevent future atrocities and to ensure that those responsible for war crimes are held accountable.